Welcome back, looters. Today we're going to talk about conceptualizing your board game, what that sort of means in terms of the starting process of getting your idea together. Normally, this starts with you saying, like, I've got an idea for a board game.
I say that a lot.
You do say that a lot. Normally, this kind of comes from three different places. Number one is there's a game you already like, but you wish something was a little bit different, like maybe it uses dice instead of cards, or what it would look like with a board.
This particularly happens when somebody else will tell you about a game. They'll be like, oh, I had this game, and you go in, and you'll start hearing little pieces of what the game is like. Yeah. And then so you have this idea in your head of, oh, that's cool. You're like preconceived, and then you actually play the game, and you'll be like, well, this isn't what I expected. What I thought it was.
This is a letdown.
What I thought it was going to be, and then you articulate what you thought it was, and you're like, you realize
that's a better game.
That's a different game. That's just.
I would want to play that game instead.
I'm going to write it down. Hold on.
There's already a game out there, and it does something that you like, but there's something or multiple things about it that you would want to change.
Yeah.
Number two is if there is a specific theme for a game that you have in mind that you haven't seen or you haven't seen done in a way that you like.
Unicorns.
There's a lot of games with unicorns, but are they done in a way that you don't like?
I don't know. Just saying.
There can always be more unicorn games. And number three is a mechanic or a set of mechanics that you really, really like and you would want to see more of. So like, roll and writes is really big and topical as of like 6 months ago. Everyone was making roll and writes. So it was like, how can I do a roll and write in a new and unique way?
So let me tell you about one that I'm thinking right now.
Sure.
I've always thought it'd be interesting if there was a game where there was like a time clock.
Like an actual clock?
Well,
or just like a metaphor clock?
Well, it would be a thing where when you turn the dial, the time shifts.
Oh, so the board itself would change?
The board itself would change. And, like, it would be a mechanism. And it would be, like I said, it would be a clock. So it's
So like a metaphorical clock where it's like a big dial in the middle or something that you can
But it's really a mechanism that it's like gears or something that when you change the time, the whole board would shift.
That sounds hard.
I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. That's why it's still just an idea.
So that's a concept.
But it's based on a mechanism. Based on a mechanic.
And in this case, a mechanism.
I mean, it's a mechanism, but the mechanic would actually would be the thing that
changing board
would drive the game. Would be this concept of changing board over time.
So there you go. You have it in real time. There's a concept.
See, I really am full of lots of ideas.
Too many ideas.
She says that a lot.
There is no wrong way to come up with a concept for a board game, but there are a couple of things that I wrote down for you to keep in mind as we go along this journey. Start small. It's a lot easier to start with like one idea or two things that work together than to make something really, really big and have to pare back.
Or I would just start with 6, yes.
Yeah, see, that's not what you want to do. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do what Carrie does.
That's episode 2. Don't do what Carrie does.
And so it's a mechanical clock.
And it's a real clock. and it's a grandfather clock.
It's a grandfather. And then it shifts the whole board.
And what are they called? The arms that swing underneath the clock? They like knock pieces off.
And then there's a pendulum, and the pendulum
will knock pieces off if you're too close to it. All right. Anyway, the next thing you want to keep in mind is
this episode's losing its rails.
I'm sorry, viewers.
Sorry.
Help me. Have a good grasp on what you want the end experience to be like. So when you're conceptualizing your board game, I think the number one thing that is most important is to imagine in your head what you want people to experience when they are playing the game.
when I do it, I always refer to it as, like, I know what the emotion is that I want the viewer to have when they're playing the game.
You like to say that you design around an emotion.
I design around emotion. So in other words, this is supposed to be scary. So what, and so in the end, I want all the pieces to go back to whatever that driving force was.
So that's consistent feeling throughout the game. Yeah. And for me, it's more of like an experience. I want it to be high tension or like very calming. And so if I'm playing my game and it's not tense enough, I know that I've done something wrong and need to sort of reconceptualize what's happening and what I need to work on. So keep in mind what you want the player to experience when they're playing your game. Next is your game will change, and it may not even be close to the same game as when you started.
Nope.
That's okay. That's normal. Lots of game designers do that, where you start by saying like, I have this game with pirates and boats and high seas action, and then as you go, it'll change so much that it won't even be pirates, it won't be boats. You'll turn it into like tanks in the desert instead, and that's fine. Like, that idea, pirates, if that's still something you want to do, put it on what they call the shelf. Put it on your game design shelf. Put it there. You can come back to it later. Let the game sort of take its own shape.
And a lot of times, those pieces of the game that you thought were going to be the pieces that drove that game, a lot of times those pieces will actually end up in a different game.
Yeah.
So games sometimes get parsed, where you will take the parts that you liked of the game.
Your boat mechanic may not fit in this,
but
put it on the shelf,
and then
you can use that later.
It becomes part of a different game.
Yeah, exactly. This one I also think is really important. Take notes of what you're doing, what ideas you have, write them all down, because if you do decide that you need to break up that game into like, okay, my treasure hunting mechanic is here and my boat mechanic is here, maybe the treasure hunting doesn't work with the boat because those are two like really separate things. But if you have notes about that treasure hunting mechanic and it goes up on your shelf and you come back to it a year or two later, you still have all of that work you've already done, and you can maybe like piecemeal it together with a archaeology game you're working on where treasure hunting makes way more sense. And so if you keep a running track of notes, I always just write things down on actual paper because I'm an old person. And then I like shuffle them around into different folders and notebooks and stuff. You can actually just like keep track of all of that work you've already done, and it doesn't feel like you're giving things up as much.
Yeah. And then, so as far as that goes, also, it also means that you end up a lot of storing the pieces.
Yes.
So you end up taking the pieces and putting it in boxes with the notes and the actual pieces, and just putting it in storage.
But we don't have any pieces right now because we're in concept. Pieces come later, but that's a thing you'll get to. But for right now, yeah, keep things separated, but take lots of notes. You can never go wrong with notes. And then the last thing is sort of an aside. We're just talking about our design process, which may be different from your design process, and that's cool. Like, there's no wrong or right way to design a board game. Just sort of like with any creative aspect, maybe you're a painter and you see someone else painting something and you're like, oh my god, they're doing this completely different than me. That doesn't make it any more or less valid than your design process. This is just how we're just going to be talking about how we do these things and sort of how we conceptualize board games and sharing that process with you. But if you are thinking about something in a completely different way, that's totally cool. We don't want you to try and conform to what we do, because maybe your way is better, and it definitely is probably going to be better for you in the long run. All right, so let's talk about what designing a game looks like if you start with an established game and want to change a mechanic. That's kind of, as an aside, that's kind of where we started with the game that we're going to be using as our sort of case study a little bit. Okay, so story.
Which game?
Story time.
Story time.
Carrie and I were driving back from a board game convention that we really, really liked called OrcaCon. And it's a bit of a drive, probably like 4 or 5 hour drive back to our house from there. And so we were talking, and we like to debrief and talk about the games that we played and what we liked and didn't like, and things that I don't want to say steal, but like ideas that we like that gave us new ideas about, like, I saw this and I never thought about playing a game with that mechanic in this way before. And Carrie brought up a really interesting idea where she just said, what if we had a character in a game that gave stuff away? And I was like, that's really vague. What does that mean? And you were like, what if they like got stuff, but they didn't need that stuff? And so the entire
that was the
entire mechanic was, let me give stuff away.
It was this mechanic. So the mechanic is a character who's essentially rewarded for giving away items.
Right.
Because the character themselves can't use any of the items that they have.
So yeah. So this is a roundabout way of that is a mechanic. So number 3, but you had been playing Sentinels of the Multiverse at OrcaCon, and you really liked it. And we play Marvel Legendary, which both of those games are deck builders.
Yes.
And we were talking about how we enjoy those games, but the thing you really like from Sentinels is that each character has their own deck of powers that they can build things from.
Right.
And when we play Marvel Legendary, we normally have an issue, which is your husband normally cannot buy cards for his character.
At all.
Carrie's like, I want to play this character. I'm like, I want to play this character. Jason chooses one, and then he cannot buy the cards. And so they're just littering the board. We cannot buy our own cards because it just gets clogged up. So we thought to ourselves, it would be really cool to have a deck builder that you get to buy your own character's cards without having to wait for other people.
It's your own deck.
That's where, if you haven't guessed, the game I'm talking about is our prototype game called Candy Squad.
Yeah.
That's sort of the two ideas that came together to bring Candy Squad into our concept.
Yeah.
And then I feel like theme is very, very common. A lot of people are like, I want to make a game about dogs. What is that going to look like?
We did that.
I want to make a game. Yeah, we've said I want to make a game about brewing potions.
Yeah, we did that too.
And you sort of work from a place of like, what would that look like? You would have to gather resources. You would have to have a mechanic for brewing. And so taking a theme and determining the mechanics that fit with that theme versus mechanic, which is sort of the other way around, where you normally make the game and then kind of, I don't know that everyone does this, but sometimes you make mechanics and then you just kind of slap a theme on top of it, where you're like, this reminds me of this thing.
Like a time-shifting board where you turn the dial and the time shifts.
And then
earthquakes.
Sure.
I don't know why the time shifts.
That kind of makes sense,
I don't know why
I
the
guess.
board is shifting.
Yeah.
I still think that would be cool, though.
So those are kind of different ideas about what designs could look like if you take different design approaches. And sometimes it'll shift back and forth, where like you start with the theme and then you go to the mechanics, and maybe the mechanics don't match with that theme, but you really like those mechanics, and so then you have to change the theme. And so that's how the game will like change, and you won't even really have the same game when you're done, because it'll transform as you go.
One of the things that often happens between us is one of us will start with the concept somehow, And in the process of telling the story to the other person and bouncing off,
Oh yeah.
the game
It'll
often
change.
changes. Because
Stained glass.
they'll ask questions, and they'll ask, so
Mhm.
do you mean, and sometimes they'll be like, I didn't, but that's a better idea, let's do that, you know, or,
Right.
and so it does, that's the one thing about the process, is the process is
Be open to change.
is this concept of, it's like a push-pull
Mhm.
as things
And sort of a
evolve.
yeah, exactly, an evolution, and sort of being open to letting things take their own shape.
Yes.
Don't force a square peg
Yes.
into a round hole. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and that's
Yes.
okay. Like I said, you can shelf that and come back to it later. Just because you don't get to make your roller coaster game doesn't mean you'll never make a roller coaster game. It just means this game you were making doesn't really fit that theme, or maybe the other way around, where that theme is really good and this one mechanic really works, but this other piece just doesn't fit in there. It's cool. Don't worry too much about that.
Yeah.
All right, now I have some vague questions
Oh.
that I would like to ask you,
Oh, very
and I'll answer also, just so people can get different.
So there's a
potentially different
board
answers.
with a time shift.
Okay, now pendulum knocking things. How do I know if my idea is any good? I read this a lot. We're part of different like Facebook groups, Twitter circles and stuff, and I see a lot of times, how do I know if my idea is any good? Is this idea good? And they'll tell you like the elevator. Okay, so let me go into what an elevator pitch is. An elevator pitch is like a 30-second pitch that you give to someone, like, do you want to play my game? It's about a time-shifting board where as you twist it and like, so you have this very short amount of time to pitch this to someone if they want to play it in like 1 or 2 sentences. So a lot of times I'll read things that's a 2-sentence snippet, and the person says, do you think this idea is any good? Sort of out to the internet. Is my idea any good? Should I keep it like this? How do you know if your idea is any good, Carrie?
What I usually end up doing at that point is I try to figure out which pieces of the game of my trying to get to, like that was that feeling
Right,
that I
that
want,
end experience.
that end experience, like in the real mechanic I'm talking about with the shifting
Right.
board. Here it's this thing of like being dynamic.
Sure.
Okay, and so what I'm trying to do is I'll try to figure out which piece of that is, and then I'll try to figure out like a prototype kind of like scenario that I can play
Sure.
that will tell me
That's next week.
Yeah. of what that would look like and what that would feel like.
Right.
And so for me, the answer to the question is the concept and the look and the feel.
Right. So if you achieve that feel,
If I achieve that, and if I personally would find that feel interesting,
right.
you know, of that feel of a spy mechanic, or what, you know, that feel of would that feel be interesting, and do I think that feel would market, and also that theme. So
Right.
because that's almost like it's the 2 points of that feel. So in other words, that, you know,
Can
that
you get that experience
that
to
experience
the
to the player.
player? And then
And would people find it interesting to have that experience? And then that theme of, and everyone loves a game about puppies, you know.
That's true.
So
That's our entire marketing campaign.
everyone wants a game.
Everyone loves puppies. Yeah, my answer
That's
is similar. In that I find if I am really excited to play test my own game, I know it's good, because if I'm super excited to play it over and over and over again, that means at least one other person is going to want to buy this and play it.
And that's been the case with the game we're going to use as our demo. Candy Squad. Candy Squad. We played all
we played
the time.
So much.
We were just like, let's play this. You know what? I want to play it again. Let's play it. And so that was the thing, is that we found
it kept hitting the table.
It kept hitting the table, and so that's when we knew, yeah, this is going to be a good game.
Exactly. The next question is, how do I make sure my idea isn't like another game?
Oh, so the answer to that one is that you basically have to start putting together a list of all the games that it could be like,
Right.
and then you get to play them.
So how do you know what other games it might be like?
Ask people. Sit down, search the internet. Look it in the internet, and you'll be like, it's going to be a game about clocks. So you start
How many
searching
games are about clocks? Right.
And then you start asking people, and you'd be like, let them play this for a little bit. And you'll be like, do you know of any other games that are like this? And they might be like, I don't know any games about clocks, but I know a game about spaceships that has a similar mechanic. And you'll be like, okay, another one to write down on my list that I get to go find and play. And some of these games that we're talking about, you will have a hard time finding.
That's true.
You will have a situation where you'll be like,
This game has been out of print for 20 years.
Here we go, hunting down that print game.
And in that case, my suggestion is YouTube is a great resource
To watch the video?
to
maybe?
watch someone review the game or show it being played.
Yeah.
You don't have to go out and buy a bunch of games.
Oh, no,
don't worry about that. There's a website called Board Game Geek, which you may or may not know about at this point, that has a bunch of games all listed by their mechanics. So if you just know that you want a game with a deck building mechanic, you can go click on the tag and look through all the deck building games that are currently listed, which is most of them.
And the reality is, it may seem backwards. You might be like, why would I, want to get influence from a game that my game is like? The answer is, you need to know if your game is too much like that.
Or
there might be something that's better about your game than that
right,
game.
exactly. It could be that you realize all of these games do this one thing, this one specific way, and you really don't like that. And so then you can put on your hat and be like, how do I make this different or exciting in a new way for me and for my players?
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. Next time we're going to be talking about prototyping and what it means to take your concept and turn it into an actual playable thing. So once you have your concept, what do you do to be able to turn it into a game, basically? And what kind of keywords people use when prototyping. If you want to be a designer, they sometimes like jargon. I don't know if but sometimes if you get into a circle of people making stuff, they will use words. So we'll try and do like a quick breakdown on what different terms mean, but also what's the quickest way of going from, hey, I have an idea for a board game, to, do you want to play my board game? And get you to that point as quickly as possible. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions about prototyping or making a board game, put it in the comments and we will answer it next time. Thanks for watching.